The chamber smelled of recycled atmosphere and something faintly mineral, the particular scent that Vethquar had come to associate with formal proceedings, with rooms where institutional power arranged itself into chairs and waited for the world to conform. He had arranged the seating himself 2 hours before the human arrived. The Hegemony Commission on Allied Species Integration met in a curved chamber aboard the RSS Compact, a Solvathi administrative vessel anchored at Tehran Station, and the seating arrangement mattered. Vethquar had spent 6 standard years studying alignment protocols, 3 more drafting integration frameworks, and the last 14 months compiling the specific report that had brought them here today. He understood, at a biological level, the importance of spatial dominance signaling. The circular table was not circular by accident. The raised dais at its north arc, where the 3 senior commissioners sat, was not elevated by accident. The single flat-level chair positioned across from that dais, isolated by 3 meters of polished composite flooring, was not positioned there by accident. The chair was for the human. He had measured the height difference. It was 42 centimeters, which in Solvati formal architecture was the standard differential used in petitioner proceedings, the sessions where someone came to request something rather than to deliberate as an equal. It was not a cage. It was a framing device, and he had deployed it with the clinical confidence of someone who had framed 41 prior integration reviews and found the framing consistently useful. Vethquar reviewed his notes on his datapad one final time. Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez Moran, Human Galactic Forces, had been assigned to the 14th Combined Arms Group, Taran Sector, for 22 months. Age 31, standard Earth years. Listed specialty: Integration Liaison. The 14th Combined Arms Group was, by any reasonable reading of the operational record, the least distinguished human unit in the sector. No commendations. 1 pending inquiry regarding a supply requisition irregularity. The kind of posting, Vethquar had privately noted, that a species gave to people it needed to put somewhere. The human delegation had apparently sent an integration liaison, and someone in their administrative apparatus had picked Vasquez Morin, and no one had corrected that choice, which told him something about how seriously they were taking this. He had prepared for someone who would confirm his framework. The preliminary recommendation was already drafted. He had intended this session as evidentiary formality, the documentation layer before the Commission's final vote, and the choice of representative suggested the human command structure understood its position and had sent accordingly. He sat down at the center of the dais. Commissioner Scaldross, a Caldrathi, whose amber carapace had gone pale at the edges with age, settled to his left. Commissioner Tavala, the only Raxian on the panel, folded 4 of her 6 arms in the configuration that indicated formal attention, though in Vethquar's experience, that same configuration in a Raxian could also indicate absolute disengagement. To his right sat Delegate Hru, an Ursine Solvati, whose function was technical rather than adjudicative, present to manage recordings and procedural citations. The door slid open at the exact appointed time. Elena Vasquez Morin walked in and took the chair. Vethquar had reviewed her service photograph. He had expected someone matching that image. What he saw instead was the photograph standing up, which should not have been different, and yet somehow was. She wore a standard Human Galactic Forces field uniform, the gray-green one with the rank indicators on the collar, and the uniform looked like it had been worn through something, and then cleaned afterward. There was a faint discoloration at the left knee that laundering had not fully removed. She sat down without adjusting the chair, without looking at the commissioners above her on the dais, without placing anything on the table in front of her. She had no data pad. Her hands rested flat on the composite surface, and her posture was the particular kind of loose that Vethquar had learned over years of observing multiple species to distinguish from casual, because casual involved small adjusting movements, small settling behaviors. This was different. She was simply still, the way an object at rest is still, and she looked at the wall behind the commissioners with an expression that Vethquar could not immediately categorize. Commissioner Skildross cleared his throat, a sound translated by the room's audio system into the standard galactic equivalents of formal commencement. "We are convened," he said, "for the purpose of reviewing human integration policy within Taran Sector Combined Command. The Commission thanks Sergeant First Class for attending." "Sure," Vasquez Moran said. The word landed and stayed there. Vethquar looked down at his datapad and made a note. He was not certain what the note said. He looked at it again. He had written the human word for assent. He deleted the note. "For the record," he said, "could you state your full designation, unit assignment, and current operational role?" "Elena Vasquez Moran, HGF, 14th Combined Arms. My current operational role is Integration Liaison to Combined Command, which is a title that means I'm the person Human Command sends to meetings like this one. You are aware," Skildross said, "that this commission is reviewing, among other matters, the proposed revision to Allied Species Integration Statute 7.4, which currently governs the conditions under which human personnel may serve in command-adjacent roles within mixed species operations." "I was briefed," she said. "Then you understand," Skildross continued, the formal tonal coloration that his translator implant produced indicating something between procedural gravity and mild satisfaction. "The particular relevance of your presence here as a representative of human integration policy." Vasquez Moran looked at him directly for the first time. She had dark eyes, the kind of dark that did not lighten under the chamber's overhead practicals, and she looked at Skildross for long enough that his carapace shifted color slightly at the edges, an involuntary Koldrathi stress response. "I'm aware," she said. Vethquar had planned his opening questions carefully. He had an outline, 8 questions in sequence, each designed to build a picture that would support the Commission's preliminary recommendation, which was, in plain terms, that command-adjacent roles for human personnel should require an additional certification layer on account of human volatility profiles and interspecies communication risk. He had done the reading. He had reviewed the incident reports. He had prepared. He started with the 4th question on his list, because the first 3 suddenly felt like the wrong calibration, and he could not have articulated why. "Sergeant First Class, can you describe for the Commission the nature of your operational experience prior to your current assignment?" She did not consult anything. 22 months in sector in the current assignment. Before that, 3 years in the Scraith Corridor with the 9th Infantry Group. Before that, 8 months on Keller's Rock during the initial consolidation. Before that, 4 years with the 3rd Expeditionary out of Boston Station, which included the Novarian contact sequence in the outer systems. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms went quiet when something had been said that needed a moment to settle. Vethquar said, "The Novarian contact sequence." "Yes." "That was classified at the time of occurrence," Commissioner Tavala said, all 4 of her upper arms unfolding slightly. "It's been declassified for 14 months, Vasquez Moran said. "You can pull the operational record if you want. The summary is in the public archive under Combined Engagement Review 44-C. Page 6 covers our group's involvement." Vethquar made a note. He pulled the record. He had not pulled it before because it had not seemed relevant to an integration liaison from the 14th Combined Arms, which was not a distinguished unit and whose representative had been sent to a procedural commission meeting without so much as a datapad. He found page 6. He read it. He read it again. The room's ambient hum seemed slightly louder than it had a moment ago. The page contained a tactical summary in the compact format that human military records used, dense with coordinates and timestamps. But the relevant section was a casualty ratio breakdown in the right margin and a paragraph marked Evaluating Officer Comment that described the tactical element's performance as statistically anomalous, a phrase that military record language used when the correct description was something the evaluating officer had found difficult to write plainly. It says here, he said, that the 3rd Expeditionary's tactical element was responsible for securing the withdrawal corridor at the secondary contact point. It says 17 soldiers held the corridor for 19 hours against an estimated force of 400. 18, she said. 17 didn't hold it. 18 did. The report names the tactical element as operating under the command of a Lieutenant Vasquez, designation Elena. She said nothing. That was you, he said. The record is public, she said, which was not a denial, and was also, Vethquar understood slowly, not quite a confirmation, because she seemed to be pointing at a thing rather than presenting herself as the thing. The distinction was, he realized, intentional. He set down his datapad. Skyldra said, that record indicates that the tactical element held the corridor long enough to evacuate 4,400 Raxian civilians from the secondary settlement. 4,412, she said. The last shuttle was a medical transport. They had to stack people in the cargo bay. It was a little over capacity, but the pilot made the call. Commissioner Tavala, who was Raxian, unfolded a 3rd pair of arms. In Raxian body language, this was not a formal gesture. It was an involuntary one. Vethquar had seen it twice in his career, both times in response to news of significant personal relevance to a Raxian individual. He looked at Tavala. Tavala was looking at the human. Vethquar recalibrated. He did not announce this. He set aside his outline and picked up the 2nd datapad that Delegate Hru had placed to his left, the one containing the full operational summary he had intended only as a reference document. He found the integration relevant sections. He found what he was looking for on the 8th page, under the heading Historical Unit Performance Summary, 3rd Expeditionary Group. He read it. He set it down. He picked it up again. Sergeant First Class, he said carefully. Yes. The performance summary for the 3rd Expeditionary indicates that the group's tactical element, during the Novarian contact sequence, operated under multiple command structures across its 4-year deployment period, due to standard attrition. The record shows the tactical element changed its designated commanding officer on 9 occasions. 11, she said. 2 of the changes weren't formally logged at the time because we were in operational status when they happened. They got backfilled later. It shows that at the time of the corridor action, you held the rank of lieutenant. Correct. It shows that you currently hold the rank of Sergeant First Class. Correct. Vethquar paused. He framed the next question with the care of someone handling something that might behave unexpectedly, if gripped wrong. Those are not the same rank, he said. No, she said. They're not. You were demoted. She looked at him without any particular expression. I requested a reduction in rank 14 months after the corridor action. I had a tactical command certification and I wanted a field certification. The command structure doesn't let you hold both at the same level. I made a choice. You chose a lower rank. I chose a different kind of work. Commissioner Skaldos made a sound that his translator rendered as formal uncertainty. For the Commission's understanding, he said, why would a tactical commander with your record request to reduce rank? Vasquez Moran turned to look at him. Because the job I wanted didn't come with that title, she said. The title wasn't the point. Vethkor set down the data pad. He picked up the other one, the one with the extended record, and he navigated to the career summary section, which listed every rank Elena had held and the duration of each assignment. He had looked at this section before. He had read the current rank and the deployment to the 14th Combined Arms and understood it as a profile of modest career achievement. Reading it now, in sequence, knowing what he knew about the corridor and the 9 casualties and the 4,412 passengers on the overcrowded medical transport. The same sequence of ranks told a different story, one about someone who had been offered a particular kind of recognition and had assessed it against the work they wanted to do, and had made a very deliberate choice that the institutional record, read without context, made to look like failure. He wondered how many other human records in his database read the same way. He wondered how he would know. He had prepared for an integration liaison. He had prepared questions calibrated for a mid-level functionary, someone whose presence at this commission was procedurally required and operationally marginal. He had arranged the seating to position the human at a disadvantage, isolated at floor level, looking up at the dais. He had not anticipated that the human would sit in the chair he had chosen for her and make the chair irrelevant to the conversation by some mechanism he couldn't name. She hadn't looked up at the dais. She hadn't looked down at the floor between them. She had looked at the commissioners themselves in the way that one looks at the things that are actually worth looking at in a room, and the 42 centimeters of height differential he had so carefully measured had not, apparently, registered in her frame of reference as a factor worth acknowledging. I want to return, he said, to the Novarian contact sequence. All right, she said. The Commission's mandate includes reviewing whether human personnel in command-adjacent roles present elevated risk to mixed-species operations. Our concern, stated plainly, is that human volatility in crisis situations may compromise collaborative command environments. He laid the data pad on the table in front of him. The corridor action at the Novarian secondary contact point is relevant because it represents an extended crisis situation under your command. It does, she said. 400 opposing combatants, he said. Estimated 400. We counted 312 after. The rest had moved laterally before we closed the corridor. 18 soldiers, he said. 18. 19 hours, he said. 19 hours and 42 minutes, she said. We broke contact at 0317. Your unit sustained losses during that period. She was quiet for a moment. 9, she said. We took 9 casualties over the engagement. 5 returned to active duty afterward. 4 did not. The word casualties was doing a great deal of work in that sentence, and everyone in the room understood exactly what work it was doing. But she had chosen the clinical word rather than the other one, and Vethkor understood that this was not evasion. It was precision. She knew the difference and had picked the one that carried the weight without the performance. You held the corridor, he said. We held the corridor. With 18 soldiers against an estimated 400 combatants in an active kinetic environment for nearly 20 hours. Yes, she said. The terrain helped. We had 2 buildings and a cargo platform that channeled their approach vectors. We didn't hold an open line. We held a geographic funnel. The math looks worse than the tactical situation actually was. The math, Skeldra said, still suggests the tactical situation was not favorable. No, she said, it wasn't. Vethquar looked at her. He looked at Delegate Hru, who had stopped making notes and was watching the human with both secondary eyes, which was the Solvathi equivalent of stopping whatever you were doing entirely. He looked at Commissioner Tavala, who had not moved since unfolding her 3rd pair of arms. He looked back at his datapad. He had a question on his list. It was the 7th question. One of the 2 he had drafted specifically to establish the Commission's primary concern around human command behavior. He had framed it carefully to draw out a response that would support the certification layer recommendation. He looked at the question. He looked at the human. He set the datapad down. Sergeant First Class, he said, the Commission's preliminary concern, the one that generated this review, is rooted in a series of reports filed by Kaldrathi and Solvathi command personnel following joint operations with human units. Those reports describe human command behavior in crisis situations as erratic, unilateral, and lacking in the consultative decision framework that allied species integration requires. 3 separate reports, filed by 3 separate command officers, use the phrase, does not conform to integrated command expectations. She said nothing. She was waiting for the question. I want to know, he said, whether those characterizations are accurate. She looked at him for a moment that felt longer than it was. From their perspective, probably, she said. We don't make decisions the same way. Skeldra said, explain. Kaldrathi command doctrine is consensus adjacent, she said. You consult upward. You consult laterally. You wait for 3-point confirmation before committing to a course of action. Solvathi doctrine is similar, slightly more centralized but still layered. Those doctrines work. They work because your species developed in environments where the cost of a wrong decision made alone was historically higher than the cost of the delay required to make a right decision collectively. Skyldos leaned slightly forward, his carapace making a faint sound. And human doctrine. Humans spent about 300,000 years in an environment where the person who hesitated at the wrong moment died, she said. We developed a decision architecture that is fast, unilateral at the point of contact, and capable of acting on incomplete information without waiting for lateral confirmation. That looks erratic from outside. Inside the engagement, it's the reason the corridor held. The room held that for a moment. You are describing, Commissioner Tavala said very carefully, human command behavior as evolutionary rather than trained. Trained on top of evolutionary, Vasquez Morin said. The training refines it, makes it more accurate, gives it rules of engagement, puts civilian protection at the center of every use of force decision. The underlying architecture is older than the training by several orders of magnitude. And you believe this architecture is an asset rather than a liability in integrated command environments, Vethquar said. She looked at him with something he might have called patience, except patience implied waiting for something, and she didn't appear to be waiting for anything. She appeared to be present, fully, without needing anything from the room. At Keller's Rock, she said, the first consolidation action, there was a moment when the Solvathi command element's forward position was flanked and their commander went into consultative protocol, which was correct procedure. Their doctrine required it. The consultation took 11 minutes. 11 minutes is the right call in most situations. In that situation, a Novarian armor unit was moving to close the only extraction route for a civilian shelter with about 800 occupants, mostly non-combatant Solvathi and Raxian workers. The armor unit was 6 minutes from the intersection. I had 4 soldiers and a cargo crawler with a mounted plasma array that we jury-rigged to a thermal battery from a mining platform. She paused. I didn't consult. I went. We stopped the armor unit. The extraction route stayed open. The 800 civilians got out. The Solvati commander, when he completed his consultation and reached the correct conclusion, which was to do exactly what I had already done, filed a formal complaint about unilateral action by a human officer in a joint operational environment. Nobody in the room said anything. He was following his doctrine, she said. His doctrine was wrong for that moment. Not wrong in general. Wrong for that moment. I followed mine. Mine was right for that moment. The question for this commission isn't which doctrine is better in the abstract. It's whether you want human doctrine available in the moments when it's the only thing that works. Vethquar thought about the complaint. He had read it, the formal filing from the Solvati commander at Keller's Rock, 3 months ago while compiling his background materials. He had read it and categorized it under human unilateral command incidents, subsection B, moderate risk, and moved on. He was aware, sitting here now, that reading it in that context had allowed him to miss something. The complaint had described a human officer acting without consultative approval. It had not mentioned the 800 civilians. He had not thought to check whether there were 800 civilians. He had read a procedural violation and not looked at what the procedural violation had prevented. He held that recognition with the discomfort it deserved. Commissioner Tavala said, "The Solvati commander. Was he reprimanded?" "Not by human command," Vasquez Morin said. "The complaint was logged and reviewed. The reviewing officer noted that the outcome was satisfactory, and the formal complaint was retained on record as a procedural flag. No action was taken against me. No action was requested." And the Solvati commander. "I have no idea what his command did with him after the fact. That's above my visibility." Tavala made a small adjustment with one arm. "The 800 civilians at Keller's Rock," she said. "Their composition. You said Solvati and Raxian workers." "Primarily. There were 11 Kaldrathi in the group, 2 Raxian technical staff and 1 human medic who had stayed to treat the injured and missed the primary extraction window." Tavala said nothing. She was computing something privately, or feeling something privately, and in Raxian physical language, the 2 activities looked identical from the outside. Vethquar looked down at his datapad. He had a 7th question and an 8th question, and a closing procedural statement and a draft recommendation, and he was aware that the weight of those things had shifted dramatically in the last several minutes without anything in the room visibly changing. He was also aware of something else, something that had been accumulating since she walked in and set her flat hands on the composite surface and looked at the wall behind the dais with that expression he couldn't name. He thought he could name it now. It was not indifference, and it was not calm. It was the expression of someone who had been in rooms very much like this one on many prior occasions and had learned to wait for the moment when the room caught up. The room was catching up. Skeldra said, "The integration statute under review proposes an additional certification layer for human personnel in command-adjacent roles. The certification process would require a joint species review panel and a minimum 6-month evaluation period. The Commission's preliminary position is that this certification would reduce the risk of unilateral command incidents in mixed operations." "I read the proposal," she said. "Your response." She was quiet for exactly the right amount of time, the kind of pause that did not indicate hesitation. "The 14th Combined Arms, my current unit, has conducted joint operations with Kaldrathi, Solvathi, and Raxian elements over the last 22 months. In that period, we have had 0 command incident reports from Allied units. 0. Not because we changed our command architecture, because we explained it. We ran 3 joint training exercises in the first 4 months where we walked Allied command staff through human decision doctrine, showed them what it looks like from inside and what it produces on the back end. After the 3rd exercise, the Kaldrathi battalion commander told me that he had revised his unit's operating procedures to include a specific human liaison fast-track confirmation protocol that allowed him to receive and validate a unilateral human command decision in under 90 seconds. 90 seconds instead of 11 minutes. Skildross said, "That is a bilateral accommodation." "That's what integration actually means," she said. Vethquar set down his datapad fully. He folded his secondary appendages, a gesture that, in his own species, indicated a formal shift in cognitive posture, the equivalent of sitting back and acknowledging that the framework you walked in with needed revision. He had reviewed 9 human units for this commission. He had read 43 incident reports. He had drafted a preliminary recommendation that he had been confident in when he woke up this morning. He was now sitting in a room with a human who had voluntarily reduced her own rank to do a job she believed in, who had memorized the exact passenger count of an overcrowded medical transport, who had held a corridor with 18 soldiers for 19 hours and 42 minutes and chosen the word casualties with full awareness of what she was choosing and why, and who was now telling him that the answer to human integration wasn't more oversight of human doctrine. It was better translation of it. He thought about 43 incident reports. He thought about how many of those reports were structured the way the Solvathi commander's complaint had been structured, logging the procedural violation without documenting the outcome the violation had produced. He thought about the gap between those two things and what that gap meant for everything he believed he understood about human behavior in joint operational environments. The commission had been convened to assess a risk. He was not certain anymore that the risk they had been convened to assess was the actual risk. That was a significant distinction to arrive at 2 hours into a session he had expected to close in 4. He was not certain, in this moment, whether the productive unease he was feeling was about whether humans were dangerous. He was fairly certain the unease was about whether he had been looking at the wrong data for 14 months. "I want to raise a separate matter," he said. The room's attention focused. The integration statute review was prompted in part by a complaint filed 8 months ago by Delegate Hrondath of the Kaldrathi 6th Fleet, who stated in his formal filing that human personnel in command-adjacent roles were incompatible with Kaldrathi operational culture on grounds that included, and I'm reading directly from his filing, the placement of females in command positions, which Delegate Hrondath characterized as contrary to the natural order of military hierarchy. The room went a different kind of quiet. Vasquez Moran looked at Delegate Hru, who was Solvathi and therefore had no particular stake in a Kaldrathi cultural claim. She looked at Commissioner Tavala, who was Raxian and whose expression, Vethquar, could not read at all. She looked at Skildross, who had written the procedural summary that contained Hrondath's complaint and who was now looking at his datapad with the focused attention of someone who had chosen not to be in the room. She looked at Vethquar. "That complaint is part of the formal commission record," he said. "The commission is obligated to address it." "I understand," she said. "Delegate Hrondath is not present at this session. He withdrew from the review panel 6 weeks ago following a separate inquiry that is not within this commission's mandate." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. "I heard about that," she said. "His complaint remains on the record. For the purposes of this commission, I am asking whether you have a response to the underlying claim, which is that human military culture's placement of women in command positions represents a structural incompatibility with Caldrathi integrated command expectations. She put her palms flat on the table. She looked at Vethquar for a long moment, and he had the distinct sensation of being evaluated, not hostilely, not with contempt, but with the same steady and comprehensive attention she had been giving the room since she walked in, only now directed specifically at him. Every person in this room, she said, has a rank or a designation. You're Vethquar, commission lead, which I read is equivalent to a colonel's functional authority in this context. Commissioner Skaldras is the senior Caldrathi representative. Commissioner Tavala is Raxian, and I've been told she chairs the Joint Species Civilian Protection Subcommittee. Delegate Hru manages records and procedural oversight. She paused. Before you called this session to order, did anyone in this room outrank me? Vethquar reviewed the designations. He thought about the question. He thought about the operational record sitting on his datapad. He thought about the 9 casualty count and the 4,412 on the medical transport and the jury-rigged plasma array and the Solvati commander's complaint and the 3 joint training exercises and the 90-second fast-track protocol that a Caldrathi battalion commander had invented because a human soldier had taken the time to explain how her people thought. He thought about the fact that she had walked into this room, sat in the chair he had placed at floor level below the dais, and had not once looked at the height difference as though it meant anything. No, he said. Functionally, no. She nodded. Once. Not with satisfaction. With the same flat economy she had used for everything else. That's usually how it works, she said. Commissioner Skaldras said, for the record, this commission should note that the functional authority assessment, just made by Commission Lead Vethquar, is based on operational record and field experience, not on formal rank designation, and that the distinction is relevant to the integration statute review. Noted, Vethquar said. He looked at Vasquez Morin. Sergeant First Class, I want to give you the opportunity to make a closing statement for the Commission's record. She looked at the table for a moment. She looked at the wall behind the dais. She looked at her hands. Well, when I was at Keller's Rock, she said, the first week before anything kinetic happened, I had a conversation with a Solvati cultural liaison who had been assigned to explain human behavior to the Allied command staff. He'd spent a year studying us. He told me that the thing he found hardest to explain about humans was why we volunteer for things. Why someone gets on a shuttle to a conflict zone without being conscripted. His species has mandatory service rotations like most of yours. The idea of choosing to go to the hard place when you could legally stay home was genuinely difficult for him to map onto any framework he had. She paused. I told him I couldn't explain it fully either. But I told him that most of the humans I knew who went to the hard place went because they'd looked at the list of people who needed someone to stand between them and the hard place, and they decided that list shouldn't get longer just because no one wanted the job. Another pause, shorter than the first. That's the whole explanation. That's the integration you're trying to figure out. We're not incompatible with your command cultures. We're the part of the force that goes first because someone is going to go first and we'd rather it be us. The room held that. Vethquar was aware, in the clinical way that he was sometimes aware of things that he would process properly later and in private, that he would carry this room for a long time. The weight of the air, the sound of the overhead practicals, the human's hands flat on the composite surface. Thank you, Sergeant First Class, he said. She stood. She pushed the chair back neatly. She picked up nothing from the table because she had placed nothing on it. She walked to the door and stopped, and Vethkor thought for a moment that she was going to say something additional. And then he thought she was going to leave without saying anything, and he could not have said which outcome he expected. "Commissioner Tavala," she said, not turning fully, just directing her voice at the Raxian. "The cultural liaison at Keller's Rock told me the evacuation record from the secondary settlement had been filed under a Raxian administrative reference number. I never found the civilian manifest. I always wanted to know there was one." Tavala's third pair of arms moved. "There is a manifest," she said. "It has been maintained." Vasquez Morin nodded. She walked out. The door closed. The room held the particular silence of a space that had contained something larger than its volume and was now adjusting to the subtraction. Skyle Dross spoke first. "Commission lead." "Yes," Vethkor said. "The preliminary recommendation." "Will require revision," Vethkor said. "Significant revision." Skyle Dross's carapace shifted color. "I concur," he said, which in Kaldrathi formal register was the equivalent of a considerable admission. "The underlying complaint from Delegate Hrondath regarding the command position claim is not a structural incompatibility issue," Vethkor said. "It is a calibration failure. The Commission's record will reflect that distinction." Tavala said nothing. She had folded 5 of her 6 arms back to a neutral position. The 6th remained slightly extended, which was not a formal Raxian gesture, and which Vethkor chose not to interpret. Some things were not his to interpret. Skaldros said, "The certification proposal, the 6-month evaluation period, was designed to assess volatility," Vethkor said. "The volatility is not the problem. The evaluation framework is calibrated to identify behavior that is, in joint operations context, the asset we've been documenting for the last 2 hours. A 6-month evaluation designed to screen for human decision speed would screen out the human decision speed. That's not a feature of the proposal." "It was a feature of Hrondath's rationale," Skyle Dross said carefully. "Yes," Vethkor said. "It was." Skyle Dross's carapace clicked once, a Kaldrathi sound that translated into something between acknowledgement and discomfort in roughly equal measure. "The revised recommendation will need a new evidentiary basis," he said. "The 43 incident reports will need to be re-reviewed for outcome data." "I'll pull the outcome data," Vethkor said. "I should have pulled it before." The room stayed quiet for a moment after that. Delegate Hru continued making notes. Tavala sat with her 6th arm extended, and Vethkor continued not interpreting it. He picked up his data pad. He opened a new document. He began writing the revised recommendation, and the first line was nothing like the first line he had planned. The first line was a problem statement, and the problem it named was not human integration. It was integration doctrine's failure to account for what humans actually were, which was something the old doctrine had called a liability, and which the operational record, examined honestly, categorized as the opposite of that. He kept the first line. He kept writing. Delegate Hru, who had not spoken during the session except when procedurally required, said quietly, "Commission laid. For the recording, do you want me to flag the Hrondath complaint as withdrawn from active consideration or as addressed and resolved?" Vethkor thought about the human walking out of the room. He thought about the chair at floor level, placed where he had placed it. He thought about her sitting in it without once appearing to notice the distance she was supposed to feel. He thought about the fact that he had measured 42 centimeters and she had not measured anything, and which of them had walked out of the room knowing more about the other. "Resolved," he said. 3 weeks later, a brief message arrived on his commission channel from a field address registered to the 14th Combined Arms Group. It contained no formal salutation and no rank attribution. It read, "The Kaldrathi 12th Battalion ran its first live integration exercise yesterday. 94 seconds. Thought you'd want to know." He read it twice. He set his datapad down on the surface of his desk, next to the cold cup of nutritive fluid he had been forgetting to drink since morning, and he sat with the specific quiet of someone who had revised an important assumption and was still, weeks later, registering the shape of what had changed. The message had no sign-off. He had not expected one.